Hello, everyone. Welcome to 360 Degrees Excellence, where we believe everyone can achieve all-round success. Today, I'm going to be having a conversation with Pastor Gbenga Ojo. I'm going to be talking about life's purpose and career. I'm happy to do this recording with him because he's a man that knows his calling, that is living a life of purpose, and at the same time, he has a thriving career. He's someone that can tell us how we can integrate, our career and our purpose. Then apart from that, we're also going to be talking about other issues. So without wasting time, let's dig in. So the first question I'm going to be asking is from him this afternoon. Pastor Gbenga, I just want you to tell us about yourself. I mean, uh, where you grew up, and everything you like to tell us about yourself. Over to you, Pastor.
Hi, Prof. You know, Once again, congrats to you on your appointment um, as a professor. Look, you've known me for years, and just for the sake of your audience, my name is Gbenga Ojo. I was born. I'm a Nigerian. I spent the first 27 years of my life living in Nigeria. Today, I reside primarily in South Africa where my family is based, even though by the grace of God, I tend to shuttle a lot. So my family currently is based in South Africa. I live in Ghana and I do a bit of traveling across Africa by the grace of God. Now, who is Gbenga? Gbenga is a Christian, first and foremost. Um, I got born again at the age of 15. I'm 47 years old. Did my first degree because I saw one of your audience wants to know where I did my primary school, So I went to here. I first started out, I'll start from my secondary school education. Went to Air Force went to Federal Government College, Idoani, from my GSS1 to SS1, and then went to Air Force Secondary School for my Form 4 and Form 5. From there, I gained admission to FUTA to study metallurgical material engineering. After that, while at FUTA, I had an opportunity. I became born again at Air Force Secondary School at the age of 15. But when I got to FUTA, I think I took my Christianity to another level. That was largely inspired and influenced by my big sister, who got an admission to UI, came back home, a different person, saw her speaking in tongues, and I was just amazed and challenged by her life. So when I got to FUTA, I knew I was going to commit my life to Christ and get dedicated. And while at FUTA, I started up with a fellowship which is called NIFEST. Was a committed member at the fellowship, and after that, I had an opportunity to pioneer what is called Christ Chapel Campus Fellowship at FUTA. It was never a big fellowship. It was a small fellowship. I don't think we ever went beyond 30 people, but by the grace of God, it was a place where I discovered purpose and I kept on going on. Now, while I was at FUTA, having discovered purpose at Christ Chapel, pastoring Christ Chapel, I then went on to start what was then Alakpere Christian Youth for Christ Crusade, Fellowship, which hosted a few crusades, which by the grace of God, 20 years down the line, I get messages from people that make reference to how they discovered destiny. And so in 2001, I relocated out of Nigeria to South Africa to start my master's program in mineral economics at VIT University. And then in 2003, I pioneered, with the support of my wife, we pioneered the Pacesetters Church, which was then called Dominion Family Church. And so the family had had residence in Johannesburg all the while. Like you rightly pointed out, I'm going to get into that direction of how I got back into my career 8 years after leaving the university, and how God has been faithful in redeeming the times and the seasons of life for me. I'm married to Titi Layo, my precious wife, and we're blessed with two teenage kids. And so that's my journey so far. Yeah.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And I like to ask this question.
Yes.
A lot of people might be asking, how did you know that you've been called to be a pastor? That you have a purpose to pastor the flock, to pastor a church. How did you know that?
How did I know? You see, my journey is interesting. Now, I believe that my journey is one of God getting my attention to a nudging that I did not understand what it was all about. My story is just like that of a Peter. Okay, let me rephrase that you did not understand. So when I got into, like I just said to you now, when I got into FUTA, I was clear on the fact that I was going to maintain my testimony as a believer. So what I did was just to serve God religiously and dedicatedly. Bear in mind, before I got into full-time, I had been involved in doing street evangelism, preaching in buses, preaching on the streets, because of the denomination where I got born again. These were things you did because you were a Christian. So when I got into school, I was not planning to pastor. But when I even took up the role to be the pastor of Christ Chapel Campus Fellowship, I was not really doing this because I needed to pastor after the university. But one day, while I was the pastor of Christ Chapel, I was invited into a program that was organized by a dear mentor of mine, Reverend Albert Femi Otuwole, the Victory in Life Camp meeting. And at that meeting, for the first time, I really saw young people. Now, I come from a different background. I saw young people, operating in the realm of the supernatural in a way that I had only seen on TV with the likes of Benny Hinn. And that was where, at that point, they were being hosted by remark Campus Fellowship that was led by Pastor Godman and Pastor Francis Adebayo. And so I was just caught up with the fact that how can young people be doing this kind of a thing, and I wanted more from God. But by the second day of the meeting, a word of knowledge was spoken over my life by one of the ministers that was in that meeting, precisely by the name Pastor Kunle Ajayi, and he began to speak about how God had called me into the ministry. That was the very first time in my life that I got that attention. But interestingly, that particular day, I went to bed with a clear word from God that I knew that I was called of God into the ministry, and it was no fluke. Now, for me, because even though it was ignited by a prophetic word, which I would always advise people, don't go that route. Never make a life decision based on anybody's prophecy. Nonetheless, the peace of God that came to me much later, and the words of God, because I then sought the face of God over these words, gave me a conviction that no man could take away from me. I did not see a vision. I did not have God appear to me. I am amazed and I am challenged when I hear people talk about, they had encounters, which I wish I had, but I never had the encounter. But over the years, I've come to realize that the strongest way that God leads us is through the inward witness. So I was fully persuaded based on the things that I heard from God that I was called into the ministry. And from that day, no one could take that conviction away from me.
That's interesting. There, I can see the importance of relationship. You had relationship with great people, and they were able to, point out, the purpose of God for your life. But you went ahead to confirm, to pray to God, and you got a confirmation. And we can see what God has done through you, and what God will continue to do through you. Is amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. You have an active career. You've been able to balance an active career with the responsibility of pastoring an impactful church. It's not a joke. It's not easy. I mean, can you share the secrets of how you've been able to do this?
Okay, look, Prof, I'll say this to you. I speak from the angle of my experience. I speak from the angle of my understanding of God at this phase in my life. I speak not as an authority, and I want people that listen to me to take this with a balance and to always understand their part. I think for me, I would say what has helped me thus far and understand an impactful church will always be a relative term. It's relative to your understanding of your vision, it's relative to your understanding of what God has called you to do. And you are not comparing yourself in any way to anybody. So now back to your question. Number one, for me, be clear about your assignment. Now, I believe that one of the reasons why we are unable to balance career and purpose is because, number one, or let me say this to you, before I even talk about being clear about your assignment. Okay, let me put it there. Be clear about your assignments. Are you following me? Be clear about your assignment. You see, many a times the reason why people are not able to balance is because they are trying to take on themselves what God has not told them to do. Am I communicating with you? I'm clear about my assignment. I'm called to raise leaders. I'm clear about my assignment. Now, it doesn't matter the wave of things that goes around. I am not perturbed, I'm not distracted. I focus on my assignment and I do not evaluate my success based on your expectations of me. Am I communicating with you? So, number two, I don't compare myself with anyone. Because you see, at the end of the day, those that compare themselves with others are not wise. And so if I try to compare myself to anyone and all of a sudden I hear the great things, I've got some amazing friends that are doing great things in Nigeria and around the world. Now, if I try to do what they are doing, which they might be called to do, I will get into an unhealthy competition, taking on an assignment that I'm not graced for. And you must understand that anything that you do that you are not instructed to do, you will need your own strength to fulfill. So for me, I stay in the place of my assignment with clarity. I avoid unhealthy competition with anybody because I've come to realize nobody knows my encounter. Nobody knows my persuasion. Neither do I know your encounters, neither do I know your persuasion. Number three, I create a system around myself. Let me say this to you, as Africans, we are not trained to create system. And whenever you don't have a system, whether it's at home, whether it's in your organization that you're building, let me give an insight. By the grace of God, I'm an employee right now. By the grace of God, I've got companies, one or two companies that I'm running. By the grace of God, I pastor a people. Am I communicating with you? Now, for this to work without stress, I need to create a system. My pastor once said something to me that blessed me. If your current level is stressful for you, you're not ready for the next. So I always say to myself, the proof that I'm ready for a promotion is my ability to be stress-free with my current level. So, and the only way for me to be able to be stress-free with my current level is to ensure that I create a system that does not rely on me. So before I took up the offer that I currently have that takes me away from home, God told me to start a company. I started the company. And while I started the company, God said to me within the 18 months period, which I didn't even understand the duration, he said to me, he said, son, I need you to build a system that is not built around you. So I began to say to my leaders in church, we need to build a system that is not built around me, that is not built around me. Number one, it was God's instruction. Number two, I knew the system was the way to be stress-free. So system for me is important. And very important for me, I have a supportive wife. I believe that when we were in school, we used to hear the phrase that the person you marry will either make you or will marry you. That phrase, as simple as it was, Prof, it remains very truthful up to today. I believe that if I'd married a woman that was not content, I believe that if I'd married a woman that would always compare me with my contemporaries, I believe that if I'd married a woman that did not understand the phases that I went through in life, I believe I would have missed it. Let me put things into context. My first few years in South Africa did not start off very rosy. My first few years in South Africa did not start off looking like a man that was made. We went through what you might call a difficult moment, but yet I knew that maybe it would have been less difficult if I knew what I know now. Do you understand me? Because many a times we blame difficulty on some sort of mystical powers against you. But I think ignorance oftentimes breeds difficulty. So, but nonetheless, Titi has been extremely supportive on this journey in allowing me to follow God's call upon my life as much as possible. And lastly, I think for everything that you are called to do, I repeat, everything that you are called to do, not the one that you've adopted that others are doing. You need to seek God for the wisdom, because the proof of every assignment is you'll always have the unique wisdom for execution. There is a uniqueness. Let me tell you, the life I live right now, man of God, is a life that if you are not operating in wisdom, you will mess up. If you're not operating in wisdom. Now, a youngster can look at me and say, oh, I want to live in another country, and then my wife is living in another country, travel across Africa and manage a business and be committed to my company. A young man might be listening to me and saying that. Let me tell you something. If you don't have the wisdom to operate, you may lose your marriage and win your business.
Yeah,
so
you're
you
right.
need wisdom to be able to put balance in life.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Wisdom is very, very important. You also mentioned the importance of a system. You need to build a system. I agree with that. And also not comparing ourselves with other people, like what you just said now. Somebody
Yeah.
might be listening and might say, I want to do the same thing. Don't compare. You must really ask God for wisdom on what to do. I totally agree with you. I also believe that every child of God has a purpose. But some people have been anointed to do special thing. You know, do you agree with that or you disagree? If you either agree or disagree, can you tell us why?
Man of God, I would answer that and say yes and no. I agree to the fact that every one of us has been called for a purpose. Before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. And the purposes of God for your life, you always discover, because it was pre-designed, it was preordained before you, it was preordained before your existence. Am I communicating with you?
Yeah.
Now, so the purpose of God for your life, which is probably like Max Moropo will put it, the original intention for your creation was preordained. Let's clarify one thing. Purpose and career could be a bit different, or in fact, they are different.
Yeah.
The purpose of God for your life always has something to do with other people. You cannot be called to be the CEO of Sasson. It's not a calling. That's
Yeah.
a career.
Yeah.
But when we begin to talk about purpose, it has something to do with the liberation of men. It has something to do with giving back to community. It has something to do with reaching out to people. So purpose always has something to do with people. So I believe that every one of us that is born here on earth has a divine assignment for which we were designed to make the puzzles and to bring beauty upon the earth. And I believe every church needs to teach your people to be able to discover the purpose of God for their life, and so that we might not break ranks. But do I believe that we are all anointed for the purpose? I believe that you are anointed for the purpose, but I believe that when it comes to the anointing of God, there is always a price to pay. I believe that when God gives you an assignment, if you do not grow yourself in paying certain price for the anointing. Now, I know that Christ has paid the ultimate price. When I say price, I'm saying you already have in the pool that you need to raise leaders. You cannot raise leaders without being informed about leadership. Do you understand me?
Yeah.
You cannot get results. You know me. I've always read about purpose all my life. Now, you cannot talk with authority about purpose without being informed in that direction. So the more you are informed, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So the more you are informed, the more you begin to enjoy the grace of God in that area. So that's why I said, although you are called for an assignment, there is a price of making sure you grow in the knowledge of Christ in that particular area for you to express the anointing of God in that area. So I may be called to teach people about purpose. If I do not grow myself in the knowledge of it, I will not impact my generation, and my dream will only remain a dream. But the more I grow in it, every time I speak as an authority, and there is something about whatever you have taught as a revelation, it impacts life. Do you understand me? But whatever you read does not impact life. But it takes reading to batch revelation, and it takes revelation to be impactful.
Wow, that's solid. Thank you for that inspire, response. Another thing I want to say is that I just want to talk about purpose. This coming to my mind, that the purpose of a life is to live a life of purpose. And a lot of people have wonderful career. And the question I want to ask is this: how can a career? How can you integrate purpose into your career? Because if we are not living a life of purpose, you might have a wonderful career. You might be earning a lot of salary. You won't be really, fulfilled until you begin to live a life of purpose. So how can we, integrate, our purpose into our career?
Thanks, Prof. Look, like I said, purpose, we've defined the fact that purpose and career are two different things.
Yes.
Now, I think that number one, the understanding of the fact that when you close your eyes on this part of eternity, the only thing that will give you ultimate satisfaction is the knowledge that you fulfilled your purpose in life. Now, no matter how much you want to talk about career achievements, I can tell you that when Gbenga Ojo lies down on the bed, goes to bed to sleep, the one thing that gives me fulfillment is that text message that I get from somebody that because of what you said 20 years ago, my life has never remained the same again, is a whole lot more. It was a whole lot more to me than money. Now, how then do I integrate my purpose and my career? I believe that one of the sincere mistakes that was made when we were in school is the fact that, and I was a victim of it, but I always say to people, you don't blame people that taught you that because they taught you what they knew. Is the fact that we had the conception then that the moment I'm called of God to do a thing, that the thing that I'm called of God to do, like, for example, let me take the context of ministry. I'm called into the ministry. The ministry is my purpose, and the ministry is my source of income. And you know what that did over time was it brought about a situation wherein many people got frustrated somewhere along the line in trying to genuinely fulfill an assignment. Or people found themselves in a situation wherein they got themselves involved in things that they should not have. Am I saying that you cannot have a purpose as a career? No, but I'm speaking from my experience. So how do I integrate my purpose with my career? Number one, I realize that my career is a fuel, provides the resources for fueling my purpose. I realize that I have my ultimate fulfillment in my purpose. When I say my career profiles the fuel for integrate, the fuel for, the fuel for funding my purpose. Let me give you an example. Do you know, man of God, that when you look at a lot of unbelievers that later on in life start foundations, many a times resources for funding the foundation oftentimes coming from the proceeds of their businesses. Yes. So they build a multi-billion-dollar worth of business, and then they say that 20% of our revenue goes towards funding this foundation that does X amount of things in Africa. Now, when you look at it actually, based on what they are doing through their foundation, they are actually funding their purpose, which is the one that will ultimately give them fulfillment. When you ask them, you'd realize the money they have made never gave them fulfillment. Yeah. But it is their giving back to society, and I'm talking about whether believers or not, is what brings ultimate fulfillment. Now, why did I use that illustration? What I've noticed in the body of Christ is this. You have a believer that believes that I should start an orphanage. But because of the way he has been wrongly taught about balancing purpose and career, the individual starts an NGO, sends out letter to everybody, and gets offended that people are not giving towards it. Am I communicating with you? Yeah. Because it's easy for us to always dwell on church, but let's break it down to the average audience of yours. So he gets offended that nobody is funding, maybe God is not with me, and yet remember the person that we're talking about may probably be a medical doctor that believes based on his passion, God told me to give up my medical profession. Can I say this to you? Time has proven that a lot of the time, many of us that gave up a career, we gave up the career not necessarily because we had God, but because of our zeal for the moment. Now, that does not say that God does not call people out of a job. I want your audience to hear me with balance. Yeah. But the point is this: assuming the person grew up to be a neurosurgeon, had this understanding of the fact that I needed to fund an orphanage, do you know, man of God, that the same individual would have been using the proceeds that comes from that into the orphanage, and yet other people, corporations, will be to give towards it because people can trust you with what you have proved. Yeah. I hope it's making sense. So because you have proven that you've made this work, you would have a network of friends that say, I also want to do this, but I do not have a system to put my money into. So they start giving. So it becomes a lot easier for you to raise the fund for you to be able to. But you know what happened in the past? We had many young people that were bright in school, left the university, all in the name of the calling, and now they are unable to even fund the vision. So for me, over the years, as God began to work on me, I realized that my career now is just a vehicle that God uses to fund my purpose. Everywhere I go, there are people that I don't meet within the four walls of the church that I gladly point them back to Christ, number one, and number two, I help them discover that you are in this world for more than just food. You are here to fulfill an assignment. And within your own space, you know, another thing that I think happened to us in Africa, and in particular, is we call the fulfillment of vision, we've attributed it to, I need to win 1 million people. Hello, if I influence 1,000 people in my lifetime, but out of the 1,000, I have 4 or 5 people that influence 1 million, I think I've already influenced 1 million.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, so true. I like what you just said. It's so true. You know, recently I did a video about O for Africa. Yeah. I said 7 strengths about Africa. Then I also talked about my O for Africa. Then I also talked about what we need to do to make Africa a better place for all of us. And I also know that you are a firm believer in Africa and our resources. Can you tell us your hope for Africa?
Pastor Tosin, I think my hope for Africa, I think the Church of God is a hope for Africa. I think that one of the reasons why the church is under the attack that it is under is because the devil fears the church. I believe that the Church of God is supposed to be the light of the world, and we are the light of the world. I believe that when the gospel is taught in its entirety, and when we begin to teach what I call the balance of this gospel, the one that liberates, the Bible says in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And light always brings about development. I believe that when we begin to emphasize the true gospel, I'm not talking about the religion. I'm not talking about creating a people that are not enjoying their life because they need to live a spooky life, that has been created by culture. I'm talking about when we preach about Jesus Christ, I'm telling you, and we talk about the message of the gospel, I can tell you that Africa has a hope. So this is a catch. Africa is probably one of the nations that is experiencing a revival. We cannot divorce ourselves from the fact that in spite of the revival, I believe, my personal conviction, that there is a skew in the understanding of the gospel. And I believe that God has always kept a remnant for himself, and that remnant is changing the face and the presentation of the gospel, that the gospel come in its total package. Now, Jesus remains the message. Nonetheless, I believe that Jesus always brings enlightenment. So, two, based on my training in the mining field, Africa is so blessed with natural resources. Do you understand me? That in the past, the natural resources were exploited, by the developed nations. I believe that God is raising a new generation of Africans and a new generation of African entrepreneurs that are saying that we need to have the boldness to be able to access our resources and do something with our resources, and not just allow people that tell us we can't do it to speak into our lives. So I am a firm believer. Now, if you give me an American visa today, I will go. If you give me an American citizenship, I will take it. But if you tell me to relocate, based on the understanding that I have now, I am committed to contributing my own quota to the continent of Africa to make it a better place. I believe that if Africa will break the gap between us and the West and the developed country, there must be a supernatural dimension that comes based on residing on the wisdom of God and not the wisdom of men. I believe that number three, Africa is blessed with human resources. We've got a very young population. We've got a very hungry population. And I believe that everywhere I go to in Africa, I see a people that are industrious. I see a people that are determined. I see a people that are breaking away from the limitations from the human limitations that have been placed on them. Prof,
Powerful.
I believe in Africa. I believe in its resources, but I believe the church has a part to play in the enlightenment of Africa in this system. Thank you.
Powerful, powerful. When you said that the church, is the hope of Africa, I just remember the song. The words go like this: that Christ is the hope for our world today. And I was just remembering that Christ lives in us.
Yes,
so the
sir.
church is a representative of Christ on earth. So the church is the hope of Africa. So if we take a rightful position, we can change this continent. If we begin to do what God has told us to do. On Sunday I was sharing in a step, what will Christ do? When we begin to do what Christ would do, we will change our nation. But the problem most of the time, I think, a lot of us, we think only about ourselves. If we begin to behave like Jesus did, our continent would be a very great place. You remember the story of the Good Samaritan, how he assisted somebody that he met, that was wounded by the thief. And then Jesus said, our neighbor is anybody that we can help. When we behave like Christ, we will change our nation, we will change Africa. I just pray that God will help us, as Africans to do that. And I know we can do it. I like what you just said. And I like your passion for Africa. We need people like you to be passionate about Africa, to contribute their own quota. Because if we don't do it, who is going to do it for us? If somebody said Africa's problem can be solved, will only be solved by Africans. I like that. You know, you are a person that has a lot of wisdom. You know, as you were talking, I was just being blessed. You know, and
Yes.
your congregation. You know, I'm sure they are blessed to have you. And so that takes me to my next question. I want you to share with us uh, leadership and life lessons you've learned in the last 5 years, 2 to 5 years. Can you just share
Yeah.
with us?
Oh, thanks, Pastor. Yeah, I still call you Pastor Tosin, Prof. Thanks a lot. I'll say a few things. Number one, from the angle of pastoring, I've learned one thing: love the people, but don't own them.
Hmm.
Love the people, but don't own them. When you love them and you don't own them, um, all that you do will always be about getting the best out of them. And it always protects your heart from being hurt.
Hmm.
Because people that rally around every leader, you would always have the loyal, you would always have those that are following you because of what they want to get. But I think the worst state you can be in as a leader is to lead from the angle of bitterness. And one of the things that caused bitterness is when we begin to hone the people, hoping that they are indebted to us for our investment in their lives. So I've learned in the last 5 years that when it comes to pastoring God's people, I love them with all my heart. I would do everything that 1 Corinthians 13:4-8 talks about love. I would act in my image as a child of God and a love being, but I do not own you, knowing fully well that you can walk away anytime and I will not feel you back to walk away. So, as a principle, there is no one that has ever come to me to tell me that God told them to leave the Pacesetters church that I said you cannot go. You would always have my blessing, because the moment you tell me God told you, I believe that it's better to obey God than to obey me. But time is always the proof whether God told you or whether you were living for other ulterior motive. But I am not the judge of that. Number two, don't be afraid to be vulnerable before your people. Don't be afraid. I think we have created a culture wherein leaders have to hide their vulnerability. Always realize that there are measures of information that cannot be handled by everybody. So manage the information you share, but don't be afraid of being vulnerable. My experience is this: people can relate with a vulnerable leader than a leader that appears not to be vulnerable. What do I mean? So when I tell you that I went through a few challenges in my marriage before I got it right, you want to hear how I made it happen eventually. But when I tell you I've never had one, and that does not mean that there are people that have never had one, because the knowledge base will always determine whether you have one or not. Now, there are things I may have mastered in life. I will be quick to let you know that I did not get this right. But whatever has been a struggle in this part of the world, especially in Africa, leaders are made to believe that they need to create an aura that I am all knowing. I am not afraid to let you to know. I don't know when I don't know. If I need to ask, I'll ask. And if it's not my specialty, it's not my specialty. I'm not afraid to be vulnerable. But one thing I've noticed, Prof, over the years, is that many a times my story of vulnerability has blessed more people than you would ever imagine. Pay attention to the men, to pay attention more to the words of men than to pay attention to the actions of men more than their words. My opinion is this: that look, especially pay attention to the consistent actions of a man more than their word. As a leader, when people are following you, always pay attention to their actions more than their salutation of you. Because many a times your action is a true reflection of the intentions of your heart. So I have a way of now, I lead a people paying attention to their action. So let me give you an example. This COVID-19 for me has revealed the depth of the conviction of the church and those that go to church about church going. Do you understand me? I have my understanding of the fact that we need to be extremely cautious about things, but I paid attention to the actions of men during this period, because your actions, especially under pressure, are a true reflection of your conviction. So when I see your action, especially when you are under pressure, I would be able to discern your conviction and know where to place you. Will I say number 4? Always choose loyalty above skill. Always choose loyalty above skill. Men that are loyal can become skillful, but men that are skillful are dangerous to have within your network. Men that are skillful and not loyal, they will betray you ultimately. And let me tell you something, the higher you go, you are looking for more loyalty, knowing fully well that a loyal man that is winning can become skillful. But a skillful man will always have his own agenda if he's not loyal. So if I have an opportunity to choose and to recruit, I will choose loyalty above skill today. Second to the last, always create a system around yourself. It's the way to avoid pressure. And lastly, okay, I think that's the last one. Always create a system around yourself.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all those lessons, those leadership lessons, those life lessons. And as we were talking about system, I was just thinking about the importance of delegation. You can't do everything. You have
Yeah.
to delegate to people. You also need a system around you. Um, perfect.
And
Uh,
if I may just add one
okay.
last thing to that, I would say lead by example.
Yeah.
Don't just tell people to do things, do it yourself.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that by the grace of God, I pastor a growing church, and God has helped us. But, Prof, up to now, I believe that even last year, I must have swept the church before. I'm not too big to sweep the church of God. These were things that I saw my dad do at the age of 50, carrying rice on his head during retreat at Deeper Life Bible Church. So I've said to myself, and because of that, I've learned to maybe to an extreme, but I demystify you treating me as this special person. I demystify it. I think I want to be with the people. I want to be able to lead them, but I don't want to keep this aura of this invisible being, especially among church folks, because trust me, on Monday when I go to the negotiation table as a businessman, I'm not going to introduce myself as Pastor Gbenga. I'm going to introduce myself as Gbenga Ojo. So if
Yeah.
I can be that human to the people I strike deals with, what makes me to now all of a sudden, when I step to the walls of the church, I need to be this supernatural being that needs to be worshipped? No. I think lead by example and manage the aura that you create around yourself.
Perfect. Thank you. You also talked about vulnerability. I also realized that in our culture, people don't like to be like that. And when I compare our culture to the whites, you discover that they are more, sincere. I don't want to call it pretense, but in our culture, it's like people tend to pretend. If a pastor may not want to tell you he's having problem in his marriage, but you discover that a white person will say, okay, we had this problem in our marriage and this was how we solved it, you know. And I think it's very, very important for us to be sincere. And when I read the story of Paul will always tell you, I was a chief sinner. Paul was not afraid. And I think that's what we must learn. We can learn that from the white, that we should not be afraid to let people know who we are. And because there are people, having problems that are listening to us. And when we tell them that, look, we had this challenge and we're able to overcome, they will be able to, be more sincere with us. They'll be able to reason along with us. But I know it's going to take some time because of our culture, you know.
Yeah.
But I like that you were not afraid to be vulnerable. It's very, very important because we're human anyway. And I'm so happy to have you. I know you are very busy, but you've been able to take time out of your busy schedule to do this. But before I release you, let me ask you this last question. What's your closing remark today?
Wow. once again, thanks for having me. I do not take this for granted, and I really hope that the whatever I've shared has been a blessing to all your listeners. And I would really would encourage everyone to, if it's been a blessing to them, to share with someone else that they know it will be a blessing to. My closing remark will be: number one, in life, seek clarity about your assignments. Seek clarity about your assignment. Know how God speaks to you. On that note, you must know how God speaks to you, and make sure you are living a life based on conviction. Based on conviction. Avoid unnecessary competition. It oftentimes leads to distraction. I believe that, if God had not helped me, I always say I'm content to a fault. But I'm the kind of guy that can drive the same car for the next 5 years and not be under pressure that my friend changes car, and I'll be happy with it. Do you understand me? But I think that it has helped me over the years, because I do not allow men to define whether I'm successful or not. Time is the proof of it. Time is a proof of it. So avoid unnecessary competition. Unnecessary competition, and I'm just going to touch this because it's dear to my heart. You see, unnecessary competition is, if you get yourself into unnecessary competition, if you're not careful, the person that ultimately should be your contemporary in life, you would have submitted yourself to them as a mentor. Because we come from a culture, especially within the church circle in Nigeria, where in the moment you pastor a church that is larger than mine, you expect me to relate with you as a mentor. It is the one that wins at the end of the race that is the proof of who succeeded. You may have started faster than me, but time is the true proof as to who was successful or who was not successful. So if you are in a haste to get the result of others, you will unfortunately make a mockery of yourself in the journey of life. And by the time you have set the wrong order, it will be difficult for you to withdraw it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Lastly, let me say this. Be motivated by the need to continually be a gift unto humanity. Making sure that through your life, Jesus Christ is always lifted up. I'll tell you one thing that has been the testimony that I've enjoyed everywhere I go. I live a very interesting life, but I'm so mindful that because of the things that I've experienced in my life, like I said earlier, I meet people that have vowed never to go back to church again. And if I had not met them in the place of my career, I would not have been able to represent Jesus unto them. Now, so I'm mindful of the opportunity I have in my career is always an opportunity to let people know that, there are still Christians out there that live differently. My advice to every believer that is watching me is, before you become an ambassador of your church, you are an ambassador of Christ. And if you will be mindful of the fact that you're an ambassador of Christ, please represent the gospel in its entirety. And as you do that, God is always a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. He always rewards. David says, since I was young and now that I'm old, I've never seen the righteous forsaken nor a sick begging bread. I have never seen God turn his back towards a person that genuinely serves him. Once again, thanks for having me on this show.
Thank you so much, Prof. I said, Prof. Thank
Maybe
you so
I'm
much.
going to be one very soon.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Pastor Gbenga, for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this recording with me. I appreciate you. We've known each other for very, very long. You were talking about the church you pastor when you were foot. I remember, attending maybe twice or three times,
Yeah.
And the testimonies that people have given about you, is wonderful. And I just know that God will continue to help you to continue to be a blessing to our generation. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this interview. with me. To our viewers, sure you've learned a lot from our conversation today. I just want to remind you that every child of God has a purpose in life. Our general purpose is to love others and to serve people. That is our general purpose. And until you are able to determine your specific purpose that God has anointed you to do, just keep doing the general purpose, and you gradually know it as you continue to ask God to reveal your specific purpose for you. And I'm sure some of you have a career. I want to tell you that don't let your career hinder you from living a life of purpose. Rather, integrate your purpose with your career. I want to tell you that have a career, or have a purpose-driven career life, and that should be what you should, do in life. I hope you learned one or two things from our conversation today. See you next time. God bless you. Bye.